You know that feeling of being in Times Square, surrounded by giant flashing screens, people from all over the world bumping into you, taxis honking nonstop? Keep that image in your head. Now I'm going to show you what existed in the exact same place in 1600, and I guarantee you won't believe it. Where today you have the busiest intersection on the planet, there was a forest so dense that sunlight could barely break through the tree canopy. Enormous oaks with trunks so wide that three people holding hands couldn't wrap around them. The ground covered with leaves, moss, mushrooms, and the silence, that kind of silence you only find today if you travel far away from civilization. Manhattan in 1600 wasn't an urban island, it was a wild island. And yes, there were people living there, but in a way that would make any modern New Yorker's life completely unrecognizable. The Lenape called the island Mannahatta, Island of Many Hills, and it makes total sense when you think that Manhattan has always been like this, with that somewhat irregular terrain. Except today, it's hidden beneath skyscrapers and concrete. But in 1600, these hills were covered with native vegetation, with streams running down between them, forming small waterfalls that flowed into the rivers. The Lenape population in Manhattan was around a few hundred people, spread across smaller villages. The largest one was right where the financial district is today, near where Wall Street cuts through the island. Imagine, where executives carried briefcases and rushed to meetings, there were entire families living in houses made with wooden frames covered by tree bark and woven mats. These houses were called wigwams, and there was nothing primitive about them. They were perfectly adapted to the region's climate, cool in summer, insulated in winter. Families slept on elevated platforms, kept the fire burning in the center for cooking and warmth, and everyone knew exactly their role in the community. And here's something interesting. The Lenape weren't a sedentary people in the way we know it. They moved around the island following the seasons. In summer, they stayed near the coast to fish and collect shellfish. In fall, they went inland to hunt and gather nuts. It was a constant dance with nature, and Manhattan offered everything. I'll tell you a detail that always impresses me. Manhattan in 1600 had more biodiversity than most national parks we visit today. There were black bears, wolves, lynx, beavers, lots of beavers actually. We'll get to that. The rivers were so full of fish that the Lenape could practically catch salmon and trout with their hands during spawning season. Oysters were another surreal thing. The waters around Manhattan had oyster beds the size of football fields. Some of these oysters grew to be 12 inches long. To give you an idea, Pearl Street, that street down in the southern part of the island, has that name because it was literally covered with oyster shells that the Lenape discarded. Mountains of shells shining in the sun. The Lenape used these shells not just for food, but to make wampum, which were small perforated cylinders used in ceremonies, gifts, and even as a way to record important stories. Each wampum necklace told a story, documented an agreement, celebrated an alliance. It was art, it was memory, it was currency. Where Central Park is today, that green rectangle in the middle of Manhattan that every tourist visits, there was an entire valley cut by streams with open meadows where the Lenape set controlled fires to keep the vegetation low and attract deer. They understood environmental management in a way that would take Europeans centuries to begin to comprehend. One thing we forget when thinking about indigenous peoples is that they did have technology. It wasn't our technology, but it was sophisticated. The Lenape made fishing nets with plant fibers so resistant they lasted for years. They made canoes by hollowing out entire logs with controlled fire and stone tools. A process that took months, but the result was a vessel that glided through the water without making a sound. And their agriculture was genius. They planted corn, beans, and squash together, the three sisters as they called them. The corn grew tall and served as support for the beans to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, fertilizing the other plants. The squash spread across the ground, maintaining moisture and preventing weeds from growing. A perfect system, tested and refined over generations. The Lenape also had their trade network. Shells from the coast were traded with inland tribes for furs and game meat. Stone tools from specific quarries traveled hundreds of miles. There was a mental map of trade routes that connected the entire region long before any Europeans showed up here. Now, one thing that radically differentiated the Lenape from the Europeans who would arrive later, their relationship with the land. The Lenape didn't see nature as something to be dominated or possessed. Each river had a guardian spirit. Each mountain had its story. The land was a gift from the ancestors that should be cared for to be passed on. There were sacred places scattered across the island, specific rocks where offerings were made, ancient trees where ceremonies were held. The main cemetery was where the Lower East Side is today, that neighborhood full of vintage shops and trendy restaurants. It was a respected place, visited, where the stories of ancestors were told to the young. And here's an interesting contrast. While the Lenape saw death as part of a cycle, as a transformation, the Europeans who would arrive later treated death as an absolute end. These profound philosophical differences would cause an immense cultural clash. Specifically, in 1600, Manhattan was at a moment of transition that the Lenape couldn't even imagine. It had been more than 70 years since Giovanni da Verrazzano had sailed through the bay and sent reports back to Europe. It had been decades since Basque fishermen came to the coast in search of whales and cod, sometimes trading goods with the natives before heading home. But in 1600, Manhattan was still totally Lenape, totally wild in European eyes, totally functional in the eyes of those who lived there. A place where the rhythm was dictated by sunrise and sunset, by the seasons, by animal migration. Where today you buy a coffee at Starbucks in 30 seconds, the Lenape woke up to birdsong, lit the day's fire, prepared corn porridge, planned whether they would fish, hunt, or work in the fields. Life was communal. Everyone knew each other. Children grew up hearing the same stories their grandparents heard. Just 9 years later, in 1609, Henry Hudson would sail up the river that today bears his name. The Dutch would realize those waters were full of beavers, and beaver meant money in Europe. In 1626, that famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, negotiation would happen where the Dutch bought Manhattan for goods equivalent to 60 guilders. But did the Lenape understand this transaction the way the Europeans understood it? Probably not. The concept of owning land was strange to them. It was like selling the air or the river. It didn't make sense. When you walk through New York today, it's practically impossible to imagine the island that existed in 1600. They cut down the trees, drained the swamps, leveled the hills, channeled the streams, built and demolished and rebuilt so many times that the layers of history are hidden meters below the asphalt. But some places still hold memory. Inwood Hill Park at the northern tip of Manhattan has some of the last stretches of original forest. These are trees that were there in 1600, that saw the Lenape, that saw the Dutch arrive, that survived 4 centuries of radical transformation. And you know what's curious? New York continues doing exactly what it's always done, attracting people from everywhere in search of opportunity. The Lenape attracted other tribes for trade. The Dutch attracted colonists from all over Europe. And today, people from all over the planet continue arriving with a suitcase and a dream. The island has completely changed its appearance, but the spirit, in a way, remains the same. It's a place of encounters, of exchanges, of constant transformation. Except in 1600, these transformations happened at the rhythm of the seasons. Today, they happen at the rhythm of Wall Street. So, next time you're stuck on the New York subway, or crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, or just having coffee somewhere in Manhattan, remember that beneath all of this, beneath the concrete, the pipes, the cables, the subway, there's an island. The same island the Lenape knew. The same island that was covered in forests for thousands of years. The rocks are still down there. The rivers, even when channeled, still flow to the ocean. And the history, even when forgotten, still pulses on every corner. New York is fascinating not only for what it is, but for what it was. And understanding what existed here in 1600 completely changes the way you see the city. If you enjoyed this story, comment below which city you want to discover next. There are so many places on this planet with incredible stories hidden beneath the present, and I'm here to tell each one of them. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next time travel.